Hello everyone, this is Prince Thomas. Welcome to Moneycontrol's special series on pre-budget discussion. And today we have with us one of India's most well-known entrepreneurs, Mr. Ronnie Screwvala. Mr. Screwvala, thank you for being with us.
Hello, sounds like a good time to be here, so yeah.
Great. Mr. Screwvala, we are just about 10 days away from the union budget. Now, from an entrepreneur's point of view, especially for someone who's been on it for 30 years, how do you see the present economic condition in India?
You know, as a first generation entrepreneur in India, you need to be an optimist, and so I am an optimist. Having said that, I think, when you come about union budgets, I think most of the time this annual union budget sometimes is a non-event. Though I do believe this year is a critical year in many ways, and I would have said for the last 5 years there were non-events, but this one is a critical year. Primarily because if we're setting such an ambitious goal of being the third largest economy in the world and a 5 trillion economy on one side, to the global perception still seems to say that we are slowing down. There's some truth, there's a cup that's half full, but there's also a cup that's half empty. In that environment, my first sense is sentiment is got to be curtailed because 50% of most battles won, and I can tell you as an entrepreneur, is perception. And I think India needs to win the perception war. And for that, as much as success begets success, sentiment can actually pull down sentiment. So I would say one of the first things that a budget needs to do is take care of the perception management, and therefore needs bold ambition statements, which is why I think this time's budget is going to be a little bit more critical than most because you got those benchmarks. True. I'm not saying it's a do or die budget, but it is someone where you're going to set the benchmark for the next 5 years if you really are serious that we have a roadmap for a 5 trillion economy and not a rhetoric for a 5 trillion economy.
Fantastic. I think the crucial point here is that we have a roadmap, and to prove that it's not just rhetoric, but we really want to go till there, the government needs to make some steps. What could be those few steps from your point of view?
I think couple of ones, and I think there's a fair amount being done. And look, we are a country which has myriad issues and problems, and we do have half our population living in rural India, so you cannot ignore that. So you cannot have a non-populist budget, and it's not populist for the purpose of politics. I think it's populist because 600 million people are out there, and you need to give them grants because they don't have that livelihood, and unless you get them up to a certain sense of parity, we have a problem. But I think this is also a budget which should articulate in many aspects some big and bold moves. And I think if the government is feeling a lack of resources, the point of rinsing a system out of the tax, GST and whatever else to its last molecule where it's almost sometimes suffocating industries, the government is in so many businesses that it needs to step out of those businesses. And we can't just now call it about denationalizations or privatization, because actually what they're doing is cherry picking the loss-making companies. And I'm saying you'll get the bigger value from the profit-making companies. Because at the end of the day, if you get those resources to take care of your 600 million people who is the have-nots, and then you spur up an entrepreneurial ecosystem where wealth creation and value creation and consumption creation is actually a goal and an ambition and not something to be calmed down on or to be controlled, I think it'll make a big difference. So the first thing I would say is we should open up and make bold statements for the next 5 years. If we want to get there, we've got to open up, and the government needs to get out of most of the businesses that they're in, not just the loss-making ones, not just the ones. They have to make bold steps where 60% have to be that. Then you need to pick one or two sectors that are needle moving. And I know today you have automobiles, telecom that's having its own challenges, partly brought on by themselves, partly brought on by the sector and the consumption and competition. Automobiles is slowing down, so consumption patterns is slowing down. But if you look at one or two sectors, and I'm a strong believer, for example, tourism. If I just take tourism, it is sometimes 10 to 20% of the GDP of many countries. Wow. Okay? And I think today, we are at the minuscule level of anything else. So the ability that infrastructure ramp up, employment opportunities, jobs, specialization, skilling, not then just skilling in drivers and people who are delivery boys. I think our problem is we went from an arbitrage economy created by software giants like Infosys, TCS, and now we're getting into the other arbitrage, which is food delivery agents and drivers. And I'm saying that's fantastic for ticking the job box. But my concern is that many of these companies will need to restructure when their models go from funding losses to actually being profitable. And at that stage, you're going to see a negative growth. What are we going to do at that particular stage? But I think if you take just one sector as tourism, and we should identify one or two of those, you can see massive employment opportunities, massive foreign exchange opportunities, multiple of them. And I think that and this is Indian tourism, meaning local tourism and global tourism. It also changes the perception of India. Because if you take something like that where you become a destination, people forget some of the other negative headlines or the perception headlines that go with that. So that would be my 2 submissions.
Very interesting. Another space I would like to ask you about is the e-commerce, especially because Upgrad works on the education and online education.
Yeah, I mean, we're not in the e-commerce space, we're in the edtech space.
Edtech space, yeah, exactly. So from that point of view, what do you think would be the steps that could further ease the way you do business?
I think some clarity in regulation is going to be needed, and I can see that the government is walking a thin rope, and I can relate to that in many ways, because if you start creating a surge of demand, which is led by discounts and high marketing, this is the country, whether we like it or not, where the 40 million entrepreneurs or the 50 million entrepreneurs are the Kirana shops. That's right. They're not the people who created 100 and 200 jobs at a time. They are the other professionals of life, the father and son family businesses. We can't ignore that. We can't suddenly wipe that out just because we're going to involve FDI. So I think, but more than that, it should be a clarity and then stay with it for 5 years, because then everyone knows what to plan and what to do and go forward. I think what e-commerce and overall the internet has done is spurred demand. Okay. Yes, sometimes you can say that for a country that was used to touch and feel as an economy, didn't have debit and credit cards, it would be a situation where if you didn't do it with products with discounts, you wouldn't have spurred growth. But now you've come to a stage where you can look at it in a different manner. I think for that, the key curriculum is some sense of regulation that is stable and fair, and for entrepreneurs who are running such companies to understand that if they're not looking at the profitability, then the business model is one that is hampered and it is going to have its own earthquakes.
Yes, very interesting. Now, another area would be about rural spending. Now, you also co-founded the Swadesh Foundation, which works extensively in the rural.
That is our not-for-profit, but yes. But I think we have a deep sense of understanding what's happening in rural India.
So how is it there now? Because a lot has been talked about, but we're really not sure what should be done to really spur that rural spending.
Well, I think that 2-3 things that I would look at. One is, of course, that the government does and it continues to do its sense of grants, its sense of its schemes to either get infrastructure from water and sanitation on one side, to promoting agriculture, and then to create marketplaces on one side. The second one today, if you ask me, the big challenge for our 600 million people, they're having worked so closely with the geography that we work in, is to raise aspiration levels in India. And I say this with the greatest sense of pride for my country, that we don't have that sense of aspiration. And how in rural India do we, people say, okay, let's call it financial inclusion.
Right.
And let's give them financial training, open a bank account. Yeah, but opening a bank account with the 5 rupees in the bank doesn't solve the situation. It's a good first step.
That's right.
But the main point is, if I don't know what money can do to change my life, and if I'm more insecure that if I earn a little bit more, I'll lose out on my grants, and therefore I'd rather maintain a balance at this very low level of life. That, I think, is a problem. And if we don't attack this soft issue, all the hard issues will mean that for the rest of our lives, we'll have to give doles, and for the rest of the lives, those people will not grow in their ambition and aspiration levels. And you can't have a 1.3 billion population where half that population doesn't have the aspiration and ambition level that matches the other, because then the have and have-nots, the gap which already is there, will get even wider. So that is my deep learning, and I think for the 1 million people that we work in rural Maharashtra with Swadesh, that's been a deep learning, that at the core, they don't need to feel a sense of entitlement, they need to feel a sense of co-ownership. And I think if we can get these 600 million people to feel that they are now in control of their own destiny, and the only way you can do that is to have money in your own pocket and not be reliable on grants, that's a major change. And if we can have a 10-year plan on that, consumption from rural India can change anything. I mean, it's a needle-moving change for everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Screwvala. It is great to have you here.
Lovely.
And
thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing those ideas.
Good, I'm glad.
Thank you. And there you are. Can the budget spur the aspirations of 600 million Indians? We look forward to that on February 1st. Thanks for being with us. For more videos and talk like this, log on to moneycontrol.com. Thank you.